Now let's get talking now this Monday. Now on Thursday, President Bola Tinubu signed 4 executive orders get towards curbing multiple taxation and addressing some gaps in tax policies of the previous administration. The orders affect the Finance Act, the Customs Excise Tariff, the suspension of 5% excise tax on telecommunication services, a newly introduced green tax by single-use plastic. What really are the high points and positives of these orders as instituted by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, President Bola Tinubu? Let's put this into proper perspective. And joining me on the show to start the week is a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Esiri Agbeyi. Prior to her admission into PwC Nigeria, she worked with International Tax Services team of PwC New York focused on Africa. She's a specialist in cross-border restructuring, tax planning of mergers and acquisition on pan-African basis, amongst others. Thank you so much, Esiri. It's good to see you.
Thank you a lot, Tolu. Very good to be here.
Yeah. First, I'd like us to start with what this really means. What is the implication of this directly on our entire business environment? It sounds interesting. We'll be getting commendations from all angles with regards to this move by the president. How does it come to you in a professional perspective?
So I think one very good sign, that I could use if I were online would be the thumb up sign. I think it's a very good indication of what's to come, hopefully. It's the very first step before several other steps that have to be taken. But I think we can capitalize on this big move for more improvements, which we have rallied for over the years. And I'm hoping that, investors and also businesses are seeing this also as a positive sign. For the economy at large, I think what we need to be happy about is the fact that in the absence of these amendments, we probably would have faced increased costs of goods and services. And that also would have an impact on inflation. It goes against the principle of what we're trying to address as a nation, which is bring down these rates and make products affordable for the common man. So this is a very good step in the right direction.
Indeed, the Finance Act's effective date variation order. We've had a lot of talks around the Finance Act and a lot of rejigging around that. But now the effective date has been shifted from May to September. What does this also mean practically?
Oh, yeah. So thanks, Tolu. I think that's a very good point. What this means is it definitely gives some time for taxpayers to first understand the implication of the amendments that have been put out there, but then also to prepare. One of the fundamentals that we had set out in the tax policy, which was collaboratively built, for our nation, is that we should have some transition period for taxes that are introduced. The transition period is important because you have a lot of businesses that then have to make changes on the back of that to comply. It also gives room for the taxing authorities to probably set up their systems to collect those taxes, to administer them. And then in terms of the interpretations that may be required, because sometimes when drafting tax laws or drafting policies that need to come out, if you haven't properly engaged your stakeholder market, you stand a chance of having a lot of gray areas that may be left unanswered and questions that you haven't thought about at the time those draftings are happening. And the truth is, whether we like it or not, there's no one man that's an island by himself. A lot of brain power goes into drafting properly effective policies. And so what that means is when you have a transition period that's long enough to accommodate the brain power of our nation, we're better for it. There's no jurisdiction that doesn't have that when it comes to tax policies. And when we even look at Nigeria's tax policy, we have a 90-day period at the minimum In other jurisdictions, we have them as long as even a year or 2 years. A good example is the Incentive Act that was recently enacted in the US last year. It hasn't taken effect already. There's still room for transitioning. So this is something that Nigeria needs to do better at, as opposed to sometimes we have laws that are just announced and then they are retroactively applied. That isn't good for the business environment. That isn't good for us as a nation as well, because what it does is it automatically increases the need for tax evasive behavior, which is something that we don't really need given the level of tax revenues that we've collected over the years.
I'm looking at our national tax policy, doing an overview of it. What sort of conversation do you expect us to have at this moment to rejig some of this maybe initiatives under that policy? Because many say a lot still needs to be done. In recent times, we see tax to GDP ratio looking better than what it used to be. For as long as it has known it, it's been like 6%. But I think at the moment it's above that, according to the FRS. But what sort of conversation should we have around Nigeria's tax policy at this time? That government clearly needs support from that sector to raise funds.
Yeah, so there's a lot of fronts to this. Increasing the tax revenues will not happen overnight, but then there are definitely quick wins that we can take advantage of. The policy by itself is not the only measure. It's just a platform for saying how can we ensure consistency across all the tax laws that we probably have, and how can we ensure also that we capitalize on all of the proposals that come through and we don't disadvantage the growth of the economy. By itself, it cannot work alone. It definitely needs collaboration across agencies. It needs improvement in processes. It needs increase in awareness of the tax public that you're trying to also engage. And it needs improvements definitely in our laws. So a good example is the fact that in the Constitution, we have different tiers of government that can raise taxes. How these tiers of government have interacted over the years is very critical, because what you then find is in certain instances, there might be multiple levels of taxation that you have inadvertently caused because you have given powers to different tiers of government. So by all means necessary, we definitely need to look at our Constitution, look at the powers that have been given to the different tiers of government, and look at how that can be amended to the benefit of our country. The other thing is we do know that we have a very vibrant informal sector. We also have a lot of agencies that are collecting information here and there and not necessarily consolidating on those efforts. So there are gaps of value that we've left untapped, and that has definitely reduced the extent of revenues that we can have. When I think about the informal sector, a very good interview, in fact, fantastic interview I watched recently comes to mind, where the president of the, and I don't know if that's the right terminology, of the Alaba International Market was interviewed, and he gave a very graphic description of the level of taxes that businesses have to go through when bringing ports and goods from the ports down to the markets. The different levels of taxes. Again, these are taxes for the businessman that they have to pay to tout on the way, in addition to the port taxes that would have been paid. All of these very easily increase the cost of doing business. There was mention also about the roads, the level and the quality of roads, even leading up to those markets. Sometimes these roads present themselves as death traps. And because of those measures, because of these obstacles, the businessman would definitely increase the price of his goods to account for all of those. And like I said earlier in the beginning of the interview, it's also very possible that because of these increased costs of doing business, there is an apathy to then paying taxes to the right channels because you feel you have already contributed your quota through these informal channels that have collected taxes. And when the taxes get into these informal channels, they don't get into the government's coffers. So whilst there is increasing economic activity, and perhaps when you look at the contribution to GDP of the different sectors from trade to FMCG to oil and gas, you would see that we do have a diversified economy. It's just that the tax collection isn't deep enough and is not collecting from some of these quarters, again, because of the informal nature of business that is going on, that's easily increasing the apathy. So we definitely need to block those channels. We need to increase also and improve on the processes for collection at the government level. What's the amount of effort that we are putting into collecting taxes from these businesses? How can we make sure that they are more efficient and we're not spending time on the very compliant few? There's so much data that's hovering around, whether it's looking at the CAC or even looking at the customs who are dealing with some of the businesses that are importing the bulk of what we consume. How are we leveraging or mining the data that we have in these different pockets of agencies? When you even look at the different tiers of government, at federal, there is data that we're amassing. At state level, there is different data that is being amassed, and even at the local government level. All of that data, if we're not synergizing on them, we create pockets, gaps that are not necessarily contributing to our tax revenue. So for us to move past that needle of 6% or whatever the percentage might be right now, we do need to start correcting all of these areas that I've mentioned. One other thing as well that's important is very often we introduce taxes perhaps as a result of a knee-jerk reaction. So we might hear things like we want to go green. And because we want to go green, we automatically come up with a single-use plastic tax that's supposed to punish the use of plastics in the industry. But then we don't ask ourselves how this is contributing, how that sector is contributing to the mainstay of the economy in form of jobs and even in form of the revenues that is being generated from the sale of those products. Because how does government get their taxes? They get it as a function of healthy businesses that are generating good profits. Now, these businesses have over the years generated these profits, and all of a sudden you come up with a punitive tax, and we're not thinking through how to maintain balance and say, what's the impact on society if we introduce this tax? Will the products then, the sale of the products diminish? How would that affect the top line growth of the entities that manufacture these products? And how does it even affect us at the end of the day? Because what goes around comes around. So if you reduce the products that they bring to the market, you automatically reduce their profits, you reduce the taxes that you collected before, and then there's no replacement. So there really should be a concept of replacement that comes into force. And if I again use the SUP tax that had been put forward, what we lose by not doing a thorough analysis is the opportunity for new industries to thrive. And a good industry that could have thrived if we had properly thought through would be the recycling industry. Most of the waste we have in Nigeria is, most of the plastics that we generate in Nigeria is wasted. In fact, we have that 35% of them do not get to the dump sites. So we have them just scattered over and above, sometimes in the waters. It's affecting marine life. It's also affecting our own health. The other thing as well is we only have about 10% of it that is recycled. What if we change the narrative and we could increase recycling to such an extent that we even had about 1.2 million jobs more added to society, and at the same time, we're getting tax revenues from that recycling industry. So because we've thought properly about it, we then think about how do we then best introduce a plastic tax before we get to that point where we now have another industry that replaces what we would lose. So there's always going to be an opportunity cost, but then we have to, on balance, look at cost-benefit analysis before we start introducing these things. And look at also the impact on our economy. How are the jobs going to be replaced? How are we going to ensure that people don't lose their disposable income because we've inadvertently affected the growth of a particular industry? So very important for us to do so. And another example could even be with the oil and gas industry. The World Labor Organization has a term we call the just transition, so that even though we're going green, we need to transit in a way that is just, in a way that doesn't affect the livelihoods of people. What that means then is that for any policy that we're going to come through with, or any earmark taxes that need to come out, that analysis is important to be had. What is the impact on our jobs? What is the impact on the pricing of goods? How is it going to automatically affect inflation? And this, I think, is why, the executive orders that have come out are very laudable. The period is still short. We can be better at it, but I think it's a first step and we can build on that. So what has happened now is with the executive orders, it has been moved from, say, May to September, giving us 90 days more so that we can critically start to assess how these things should be properly done, what kind of incentive measures we need to put in place, where are the replacement industries that will come in and support the industry that we gradually want to go away. How can we ensure also that even the touts, because they're part of our economy, whether we like it or not, even the people in the informal sector that are collecting these taxes now do not feel that they are worse off. Because the truth is, if you want to starve them of those revenues that currently go into their pockets, they are using those revenues to feed their families. So we need to start thinking about how we replace that industry with something else. Can we get them working on farms? Can we get them working with other partners in society that are very willing to volunteer and have them even paid on a certain level? We have so much grants coming into Nigeria and that are looking to even incentivize the society. And we need to capitalize on some of those very proactively. So again, when we're introducing taxes, we need to be thinking about the effects, the loop side effects on the economy, and thinking how we can work hand in hand with all stakeholders to get the best of our brain power and get active policies running rather than just knee-jerk reactions.
Interesting conversation. Esiri, you took my last question already and answered it. So I'm going to let us wrap it up there. I must thank you so much. Esiri Agbe is a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much for starting our week with us on Business Nigeria. We appreciate this and we wish you a very profitable week.
Thank you, Tolu. Thank you, TVC. Bye.